Today we're talking about the question nobody wants to say out loud. When parents age and need care, what do their adult children actually owe them? Elizabeth Miller is a caregiver, veteran podcaster, and founder of the Happy Healthy Caregiver. Let's start here. Elizabeth Miller, welcome to the Caregivers Podcast. We're really happy you're here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I'm ready for a great conversation today.
Well, so am I. So let's get right into it. Elizabeth, with all your experience in reflecting on what you've been through and what your listeners have been through, do adult children actually owe their parents long-term care, or is it a choice of theirs?
I think it has to be a choice because I think our first responsibility is to make sure that we are caring for ourselves, both financially, physically, mentally. And while there is the 10 commandment of honor thy mother and father, I think it's gone into a slippery slope like nobody has ever seen these days. And it's just not sustainable for where we are as a society.
Why is that slope so slippery?
Well, I think there's a bunch of different things related to that. I think where we're living in this day and age is much different than where my parents were. I never even knew my grandparents. Well, that's not true. I lived one living grandparent until I was in college, but 3 out of my 4 grandparents were deceased, and I never had any kind of a relationship with them. Times have changed. We've got technology and medication, with people living longer than ever before with chronic comorbidities. We have, a healthcare system that is fragmented and broken in many ways. And, in the olden days, we used to keep our patients in the hospitals longer and professionals were treating them. Nowadays, they are being pushed out into back into the home environment. And it's an expectation that the family is going to fill the gap on that. I just had a friend of mine, in fact, that sadly her mother-in-law passed away just a couple days ago. But last Wednesday, so not even a week ago, had a fall and was admitted to the ER, and they were going to send her home. And she's passed since then. Things were so much more advanced that luckily for this family caregiver, she knew how to advocate and to push back on that and say, no, we're not ready. We're not ready at the home to take her on. We need to get some things in place. But that's just one example of many of how people in this family caregiving role are being expected to do so much more. And I think the other thing we got to think about that too, Mark, is that, the common state of life now is that we, a average American family, married family with kids, has to work 2 jobs, both sides. And so that was not the case for me growing up. My mom was a stay-at-home mom and was managing a lot of those things. So it's not just one thing. I'm sure you probably have some insights to things to add to that too.
Well, I think that I've heard sort of an echo throughout some of the conversations that I've had that it's just sort of sprung on people, and there is no midlife sort of preparation class for caregiving, if you will. We all go through the marriage prep class or whatever, but you don't have that midlife sort of. You got to get ready for caring for yourselves, maybe each other, but also, ask yourself, what are you ready to take on for extended family? And it's not, it hasn't crept up as being any sort of curriculum on the scene, so to speak. But it's probably something a lot of people could benefit from because I think people are caught off guard.
Yeah, and they're caught off guard and they've already got a full plate that they're managing. I know for me as a sandwich generation caregiver, back in 2014, 2015, when I got started with all of this, and that, I had 2 kids that were in middle school. They were in travel sports. My husband was also working. We both were traveling a bit for our work. And on both sides, our parents were needing care. And so we were simultaneously squeezed and feeling really isolated and overwhelmed and frustrated and learning on the job. Because when we talked about work, we talked about healthcare, but also our school systems have changed. There's a lot being pushed back on parents too. Our sports have changed. There's an expectation of what we're doing for our children these days. So all of this really comes to a breaking point where what we have in place right now is not sustainable for the average family caregiver. One of the 63 million in the US now.
Those are the recent numbers. So let's go back a little bit, Elizabeth. When your dad died and everything shifted, for you, did caregiving feel like a choice, or was it something you almost inherited?
Well, some people have a caregiving event that happens overnight for them, a fall or a stroke or an accident of some sort or diagnosis. For me and my family, and I'm one of 6 kids, I also have a brother that was born with a developmental intellectual disability and has autism spectrum disorder, so needs care as well. But for us, we saw a mudslide coming at us, frankly, with my parents, that we could see that their level of care and what they were expecting from us was continuing to increase. And we were trying to tag team and take turns of helping out where we can. They were living in their dream home, 6 hours from closest family. So we were doing a lot of this remotely or having to drop everything and run to their aid. And we had tried, some mini interventions over the years to try to get them to, move closer to family, to make it more of a sustainable life for them. And they had been very clear about it, that they didn't use the words aging in place, but they said, we are staying where we are. And as our children, we expect you to help us.
But there's a moment, though, where distance is just too much. And it's that moment when caregiving becomes bathing and toileting, changing soiled clothes. Should that be the child's job by default? Or should parents actually plan for their own care in this day and age?
I think, we have, again, a responsibility on our own. I know for me, like living what I lived through with my parents, going through it now with my in-laws, helping my brother, that, I'm grateful that my parents had put some things in place to financially take care of themselves and to financially kind of set up my brother for success. But we do have that responsibility of our own to do that. So I know for me, I don't want my children to have to do all of those things that you described. And so that is why that I'm encouraging family caregivers and living it myself. Like, how do I infuse more health? How do I infuse more happiness in my life so that I can, gosh darn it, do the best job I can possibly do to not put my family in a similar situation? We're imperfect though, right? Like we all have kind of our things that we're managing. But I think, it's a responsibility on us to put those things in place. I know my children at the time said, "Hey, what you're doing right here with your parents, we don't want that. We don't want that to happen. We want to have you around. We want to travel. We want to do these things together." And so it's a conversation, and it's definitely one that my husband and I are aligned on, that we prioritize our health. We prioritize our happiness. We try to set an example for our children, and hopefully that has a ripple effect on the future in a positive way. But I would not expect my kids to drop everything, to forego their dreams and go all in on caring for my husband Jason and I. And I think my parents didn't realize at the time when they said that some of those things, like how far it was actually going to go and how much we were going to actually need to do. And, I have no regrets. Like, we look back, my siblings and I, that were in the care arena. Now they're not all in the care arena. That's something that's very common in families too. But we don't have regrets. Like, and we still don't. Like with my brother, we're really, the 4 of us at least are aligned on trying to put a long-term care plan in place for him that is going to set him up for success. And that's the best we can do. It's a partnership, Mark. Like, I almost like the term care partner better than I like the term caregiver, because I think it's clear then that it's a partnership. You've got to meet me halfway. There's things and responsibilities that you have to put in place as a care recipient and that I'm willing to do as your care partner. And I want this to be true for you. I want you to live a happy and healthy life as well, but not at the expense that I'm going to, continue to burn out, which is what I was doing.
I think that's brilliant. I love care partner. Be my care partner. We should get a t-shirt made. Just be my care partner.
The hardest thing, Mark, I love it too, but the thing is, it's already hard enough for people to take on that role as caregiver. And so I feel like if we change the terminology, it's just going to throw people off even
Mhm.
more. And I want them to own the role. It's a reluctant role that we take on, but I want them to own it so that then doors start to open for them. They start to see the community that's available for them. They start to see the resources, the respite, and the support. It's out there. It's also very fragmented the way
Mhm.
our healthcare system is.
You've spoken to a lot of people over the years, but is there a prevalent idea that having kids is almost like an insurance policy for old age? And I mean, if that were the case, could that truly be fair to kids?
No, it's not. And I think we're seeing that the decline in younger families that are delaying having children or not having children at all for various reasons. But that is not why you should go into having kids. There's other plans in place. There's other things that we can do. Um, I hope that's not happening.
I hope so. I hope so too. Um, so for someone hearing about this all for the first time, let's go in a bit more detail. What exactly is a sandwich generation caregiver?
Mm. So, a sandwich generation caregiver is somebody that is squeezed in the middle of caring for older adults or aging parents and children at the same time. It could even be expanded to be grandparents or grandchildren. And sometimes you'll hear that referred as a club sandwich. The point is that there's somebody in the middle who's feeling that squeeze. And I used to kind of remember the old Wendy's commercial of where's the meat? Like, where's the me? Where am I fitting into this equation as being this person who is squeezed? And I had this little cartoon that I found that really just described how I felt, like this push. And before I even really owned the term caregiver for me, Mark, I identified more as somebody who was in the sandwich generation, who was feeling this squeeze, who was feeling this impossible pull of all of the different directions that people were trying to just take little pieces away of me, and having to really put some systems and strategies in place so that I could find a way to feel like myself again.
Take me back to your hardest days of caregiving. What did they feel like and what happened?
Oh my goodness. It's the working sandwich generation years, they're all kind of hard in different ways. Like, I would say what I'm living through right now is hard, frankly. Like, I'm an entrepreneur who's, responsible for my own income and also caring for my brother who is on a different path with his disabilities and does not want to take, advice from his little sister. So there are certainly a lot of behavioral challenges with him where, he's just constantly throwing mean asteroids at me. And so having to shield from that, while also, meeting my deadlines and making sure that my events are happening and my partnerships are. But back in the sandwich generation work years, I wrote a blog post about a day in the life of a sandwich generation caregiver because it wasn't really until you kind of write it down and you see it, and I think anybody reading it would be like, "Oh my gosh, like, look at all of these different, like, inputs and outputs of what is going on in her day." And, and carving out some time for myself looked like getting up, at 5:30 in the morning when nobody else needed me and going to the gym and working out, sitting in the sauna with a 10-minute meditation, showering, and being at my desk, ho hopefully before my boss, got in, and then running into the workday and, um, tackling different calls and things that were on my caregiving list, and going through, work almost felt like respite in some ways. I knew how to do that job. I worked in IT and working with other people. I liked that, I could have lunch, and sometimes I was using my lunch break to do caregiving related tasks or to check in with my mom. Um, Dividing and conquer with my husband on what was going on and where the kids needed to go after school and how we were going to get fed, and then some nights I was going over to my mom's and helping her manage different things and tackling some things off of her to-do list, and falling in bed, at night like 10:30, 11 o'clock, and rinsing and repeating that over and over and over again.
Do you have a hardest memory? The one that just sort of stands out, maybe a turning point, or the one that sort of lingers in your memory where it really forced you to have to miss things with your kids because of it?
Oh, yeah, there's been several of those. There's been times where I've missed holidays where I've needed to be with my parents. There were times that I had to run out of a conference at work so that I could go to my dad's aid, and the decision was being put on hospice, and my mom begging for my dad one more time to try to be intubated one last time. There was the kids. I missed my son's birthday I missed my daughter's first day of high school. Um, so yeah, not just one, many.
Many. When you start caregiving for a parent, there's usually that sort of one moment that ends the old relationship forever. Like you just enter this whole new zone. What was the task that sort of crossed that line of privacy and dignity and made you think, nothing's normal or will ever be the same again?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I have two sisters, and we joke and laugh about it because that is a way of kind of coping with some of the places you just never thought you would go. My mom was morbidly obese. She had a lot of different things going on, but she had almost like a yeast infection or something kind of between her layers of her body and in her private section. And so we had to have a whole process during one of our family holidays. We called it Marinating Mom. This is kind of the way that we handled it. If you're not a caregiver, you're not going to kind of understand this, but where we had to, soak these towels into certain liquids and, treat those areas and kind of pat her all up. And then we had to let her marinate for a little bit in it. And then we had to go back and dry her with a hair dryer. And it was this process that happened, multiple times a day. Like we'd be out like cooking a holiday meal or dinner and putting a puzzle together with the kids or wrapping gifts and then having to like go back and marinate mom, and it's you just can't kind of make that stuff up at all. Or, she was on a Lasix pill as well, a water pill that really was debilitating for her to be able to leave. And she had mobility issues. And so many summer family vacations, my parents had a beautiful lake house up in Michigan that my older sister now lives in. And we'd be playing games with my, around the table, and my mom's on a portable John, like sitting there playing games. And, we brought friends up with us. It's just like you can't even, it's like a comedy sitcom almost where, and we're just kind of joking. My mom had a sense of humor, luckily. And so our close friend was like, it feels like we're playing games in the bathroom. And I'm like, we kind of are. It's just, you can't make it up. We would say that very often. And we would have a text thread among us about, you're a caregiver when. And, I remember a time that I was coming home from work and my parents were staying at my house. And I was always envious of the families where their parents would come to town and they would do chores and like help their families. Like, your parents are doing what for you? Like, I did not have those kind of parents. They were more work, when they would come to my house, and their pills would be everywhere. They dropped their pills. I'm worried about my kids picking them up. But one time they called me from work, and my dad was on a blood thinner, and he had scratched something on his back and it started bleeding. And my mom, with her mobility issues, they're trying to kind of care for themselves as much as they can. He calls me, says, Elizabeth, when are you going to be home? I said, I'm on my way. Okay, well, I'm bleeding pretty profusely, but your mom has, stopped it for now with a poise pad on my back. And you're just like going into this situation from work, and you're like, this is what I'm doing after work today? Like, how did we get here? Yeah. More than you bargained for, right, Mark?
Yeah,
with that question.
Yeah, I think, people have this idea that, well, eventually I'll just sort of have to help out a little bit. But very often, if you don't become a caregiver overnight, there's certainly a very rapid ramp towards caregiving, and it's a steep one, almost like a nuclear blast. But when that happens, like what's the first thing that breaks when you come to that realization that nothing's going to be the same? Is it like you have this sort of flashback in your life, like nothing's going to be the same, or do you enter almost like a period of mourning for how you have to rewrite the whole script of your life?
It's a grief. I mean, these are griefs that we have that, you know, um, and sometimes they're gut punch kind of grief, and sometimes it's like a little paper cut kind of a grief. But I remember my kids saying to me one time, like they had a day off of school and they were going to spend it with one of their best friends and their grandparents, and they said, their grandparents are going to take us to whatever it was, Chuck E. Cheese or Chick-fil-A, and why don't we have grandparents like that? And I was like, well, you have great aunts and uncles and lots of cousins and all these things, but I knew that my parents I thought they were unhealthy when I was, adult, kind of in college. And it just snowballed throughout my life, and I'm not going to say they never tried to redirect and change, and certainly did try to go to places and learn healthier habits and, try the Richard Simmons workouts or the Jane Fonda, but it just, nothing really ever stuck. And they both were kind of bad for each other in that way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a grief. I mean, it's an emotional grief to kind of be like, but that was kind of how I reframed it in my head and for my kids is like, okay, we don't have this, but we have, all of this other really amazing stuff around us.
An entourage who can step in, for sure.
Yes.
And you can imagine the flip side of there being no one else, and there are lots of caregivers out there who have no one else.
Yeah.
And, what struck me is you said you were gradually aware, even in college, that there was a path that was being walked towards maybe longer term morbidity with healthcare or health or lifestyle choices now and health outcomes in the future. But what about the individual who finds out overnight that tomorrow life is changing 180? From your experience and speaking to people, what's that feel like for those individuals? And they're the ones who are the most vulnerable because they have no sort of preparation for that.
Yeah, I think all of the scenarios are hard, and so I hate to kind of compare one caregiver's journey to another because to that caregiver, that is a really hard thing. So I don't want to minimize that's harder than this or this is harder than that. Like it all sucks. It's all hard, and it's maybe there's a little bit more compassion. Like I know for me, I was very resentful from my parents for putting us on this trajectory, and, my mom being a smoker, I got COPD and all of the things, diabetes and the things that, whereas maybe somebody who had a diagnosis overnight or accident may not go through that, anger phase about it. Like this person did this to us. So perhaps a little more compassion, but I think all of the scenarios are hard, whether it's an overnight thing or a mudslide, certainly cognitive. I mean, you could certainly say adds a whole other layer to things. When people have a cognitive, then you're losing them before you lose them. So there's it's a lot. It's an emotional roller coaster all the way around, and finding the right tools and strategies to help you in that, and finding your community that gets you. Like if that were hopefully the person who had the overnight stuff, like they quickly tap into their community. Wouldn't it be amazing if their healthcare provider in places would help foster that? And that's something that I would like to see changed, is that, when we go to the hospital, first of all, everything is in the doctor's office. It's all very reactive, but somehow to say, this has got to be really hard for you, the person, their primary person who's helping this individual. And we're going to do some treatments, we're going to do this, but for you, this is a lot on you. And so these are the things that we suggest as ways that you can tap in to process this emotion, because a lot of times those caregivers don't feel that they can talk to the care recipient and person. Like how dare they, feel overwhelmed and all of that when this other person is doing so much more and enduring the pain and, their whole life has been uprooted, but all the feelings are valid.
Absolutely. And I mean, as Kate Washington recently resonated in some of her comments, is like, it's not just sufficient anymore to sort of get the proverbial pat on the back saying, don't forget to take care of yourself while you're taking care of your loved ones. And then off you go.
Yeah, I love Kate Washington, by the way. I've had her on my podcast as well, and
Hmm.
I understand she's got a new book out that I've
It's
gotta
coming
check
out
out.
this summer.
Yeah, so I'm excited about that. I know that used to frustrate me when people would say, "Oh, you should take care of yourself," and I call that shoulding. They were shoulding on me, or "You should be doing this for your loved one and should be doing that," and
Stop
I'm like,
shitting on me.
"Stop
Yeah.
shoulding on me, like, I'm drowning. Do you not see that, that them drowning right here?" But so and yet I knew that if I didn't fix something, I was gonna be on the same path as my parents and terrified of that. And we do hear a lot that, you should take care of yourself or put the oxygen mask on yourself before you care for other people. And I didn't love the analogy. And the reason why I didn't love it, and I still don't love it, is that there's not one event that's happening. Like when you're in an airplane and it's turbulence, first of all, you've prepared for it. You've learned what you're supposed to do in it. You know the masks are going to come down. They're going to come over the loudspeaker. You're going to feel it. But when you're living this caregiving life that is so demanding, there's no warning signs and nobody coming over the loudspeaker say, "Now's the time. Now, right now,
Hmm.
put the mask on yourself." So I had to find a different thing that worked for me. And one of the things I talk about is I call it feeding a nest of hungry birds, where if you envision a nest of birds, baby birds, they're always squawking. They always need something. They want something. And those birds represent your job, your relationships with your partner, or your friendships, your kids, your pets, your house, and certainly your care recipient, and your job, if I didn't already say that. But they're pecking pieces away at you and never happy, never feeling like it's enough. And that's what a caregiving day feels like, is that you're never doing enough. And yet there comes this point where it clicked for me where I thought, "Oh my gosh, if I keep flying from my nest and coming back and trying to, discern who's going to need, the attention at that time, I'm not going to be able to keep doing this. I'm not going to be able to keep showing up to my nest. So I need to put some energy into nourishment into my body so that I can continue to take care of my nest and show up to my nest the best way and that was really the pivot point for me, where it reframed the way I feel about infusing care and self-care into my life, and not saying I never feel guilty about it, but dissipating the guilt around it to say, "No, I need this. This is essential. I can't do that the other way. I know that doesn't work."
I could see how not succeeding in that domain could really set a fertile soil for resentment. And I think the endpoint of resentment to oneself, to one's loved one's partner, and individuals who are the care recipients can really spiral into something nasty. What are your
Mm.
couple of key tools to counteract the resentment phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, the negative emotions are there, and I do say you've gotta feel them and you have to process them, because otherwise they're gonna fester and pop up in other, maybe
By,
unhealthy
by
ways.
process, you mean experience, but also let them pass and let them go through you?
Yeah, for me, it could be talk therapy for people. That's certainly helping me now with my brother that I didn't necessarily do back when I was sandwich generation caregiver, Elizabeth. But back then it was writing. Writing was very therapeutic for me. I would sit in Starbucks and I would weep and like write this stuff down. And, initially my blog was anonymous. And then I thought, gosh, I think people need to know this. And I'm going to put this out there. And that was kind of scary, right? Putting it out there for the world and wondering what my mom was going to think about that and so forth. And, was I being respectful? Um, but I think those negative emotions do have to be dealt with, and they do come up. Like I'm working through guilt with my brother currently. Like he can be really evil, send me evil messages about stuff. So um, and so it helps to kind of talk that through with people and to talk that through with the case manager that works with him. And so we do want to also, I think one of the things that was also healing for me with both my mom and with my brother now is, um, trying to put things in place that is honoring that original relationship. So my sibling relationship or my mother-daughter relationship with my mom, that it couldn't just be all care, right? Like care, because I would be more resentful, right? If every time I had to see these individuals, it was just more work, never enough. Oh my gosh, like all of that. So doing some things for them, yes, but also infusing some joy and some fun in that. And so for when I would go and, I had a night with my mom that, once we kind of got things in a sustainable way, Wednesday night was our night. We would have a meal together. We would maybe play a game. I would certainly do some things, what are some of the top things on your list that you would like my attention on? Did the list ever get fully done? No. Was it a never, did she want me to stay longer? Always, but it was also some boundaries that I had to put in place. And so for my brother, we try to find some things. He loves going out for smoked chicken wings, and he loves movies, and he loves to play bingo. And so we try to infuse those things where we can as well, so that it's not all chores, but some more joy in there as well.
Well, and some new memory generation.
Yeah.
So let's turn the microphone over to the production team. Graham and Fred, what's on your mind?
So I'm going through something right now with my dad, who's 79, and I can't get him to go to see a doctor. He hasn't had a physical in a number of years. He's in pain. There's swelling. He's obese, and he's got all these health concerns, and he's losing his mobility. Like, I can see it, like, sort of month on month, and he just refuses to go and see a doctor for anything. And it's causing me, and his take on it is, well, it's my decision. It's my body. I'll go when I'm ready. And that's true on one side, but on the other side, he's making the eventual outcome for everyone that cares about him and is going to have to care for him so much more difficult. And I'm at this place where I'm starting to be really resentful about that, and about the fact that, and it's causing me to sort of pull away from him and not want to speak to him as much, which also hurts because I love and miss my dad. And so, you use this word intervention. It's like, does this sound like something that is going to soon require intervention level, that sort of strategy? And maybe you could give me just a little bit of advice on how I might go about approaching him, and so that he will go and see a doctor and make this easier on everyone that cares about him.
I mean, I feel like you're sharing a piece of my story from back in, so many years ago with my parents, because thank you, first of all, for being vulnerable and sharing that. And it's hard. It's hard to watch people that we love and adults make poor decisions, right? And have no control over it. And, we want to control it because we know that the outcome could be better. And yet we are working with people who have their own agency and can make their own decisions. And so I feel the pain of that. And I did use the word intervention, and our intervention didn't work. Like you might put it out there and be like, well, I'm not going to continue to do XYZ if you don't do, your piece of it, or meet me halfway. And they still may not do it. And there comes a point of accepting that and realizing that there are things that are in our control and there are things not. So we can certainly try to do things to influence it and say, hey, Dad, I've been putting off this doctor's appointment for me, or my colonoscopy, or whatever. If I did this, could we make it a challenge and maybe celebrate it in some way? Like, is there a way to kind of turn it into a positive thing?
That's interesting you say that. Like, I've had this crazy thought that every time I FaceTime with my dad, I'm just going to like randomly light up like a Camel cigarette and start coughing and being like, he's like, what are you doing? Because I'm asthmatic. He knows this. Like, well, it's my choice. It's because that's what it feels like for me.
You don't mind, do you? I'm just going to sit here.
Exactly.
It's maddening. It's frustrating. And, some of these things are addictions that we're facing with too. I think sometimes it's asking the questions too, like, what are you, sitting back and instead of saying, I need you to do this, I need you to do this, what would need to be true for you to go to your doctor? What is your barrier in there? What are you afraid of? And having that kind of dialogue and conversation about it. And, I've heard there's selling it, there could be some interventions, and the more we wait, this and that could happen. Let's just get the information. I think one of the strategies that worked for me to try to have my mom meet me halfway better is being more vulnerable with her directly. And I call it like letting the crack show of what's going on in your life, letting your dad see how this decision that he's doing is impacting your life. Are you losing sleep at night? Are you grinding your teeth? Are you gaining weight? Is your blood pressure higher? Sharing this story of, oh my gosh, I listened to this podcast and I'm so scared and fearful that this is going to happen to our family. And you revealing how it's impacting you is in your control. You can share that. Now, will that may not work? It may work. It depends, how they receive it.
Right.
But it's so hard to, maybe a mobile doctor or telehealth, like you could try different strategies of how to face that. But, what would make this worth it for you? What would be a good way to celebrate, like, once you did this? And so kind of going back to some of those questions. And yet in the end, none of it may work.
Right.
And that sucks too. And then it's really deciding how you are going to show up for the people that haven't prioritized their health and happiness.
I can tell you one thing, it's making me prioritize my own in a
Yeah.
completely different way. And so maybe that's the solution, is that you can't force anyone, but you can take the lessons and apply them to yourself and make sure that you're, taking care of yourself. So thanks for your...
That was the gift, I think, out of the bad situation for us as well, is like, okay, we know we don't want this. So how do we take the steps to not make that happen? I hope that things change, and I hope that there's, some of these things might work.
Thank you.
We're back from the break. We're here with Elizabeth Miller, the founder of the Happy Healthy Caregiver. Elizabeth, when caregiving became constant in your life, what changed overnight in your home and for your kids and in your relationship with your partner?
Everything. Just the image of like a relay race is what it felt like. Our life was like, it was on a treadmill or a hamster wheel. It may have slowed down, but it never stopped. And it constantly feel like tag team. And, how can we manage this? How can we better get ourselves organized to make this better? How can we get on top of our meals? What systems can we put in place? And constantly tweaking and tweaking and tweaking. It felt, it felt chaotic. And then at some point, though, I do feel like we made this switch to, okay, this is our life now, and we're going to have to put our arms around it and feel some really pragmatic ways of how we're going to be able to live life. And we don't want, our kids to be sacrificed, and we don't want our relationship to be sacrificed. And we're only going to live this time in our life right now. And so we had to sit down and have some conversations as a family, and some of that involved the kids. Sitting them down and having really frank conversations and saying, look, we're in over our heads. Your mom and dad are working. We've got, we want to be there for you. We want to do the fun stuff. We want to come to your games and your events and celebrate all the stuff and travel together for vacations, but we're going to need your help. And we're going to need you to own your schoolwork like a job. We're expecting you to stay on top of it. We don't have the time to chase around and figure things out for you. You're capable. And really kind of pulling them into our team to say, hey, we're Team Miller, and, doing laundry, and you might be asking you to start a meal here and there, but all of that with the notion that that's going to help us do more family things on the weekend. That's going to allow us to still kind of carve out that time for each other. And we laugh about it now. I mean, the kids now, they're young adults off the payroll, and the years that they'd done laundry have gotten younger and younger and younger every time. But in the end, I think the shining light out of all of that intense time when we were dividing and conquering and trying to figure it out, is that they're very independent young adults. They're doing well, and I think I sometimes wonder, like, if we didn't go through all that caregiving chaos, would it be different? Would they be more spoon-fed and entitled and all of that? Maybe. I don't know.
Seems to me like communication is such a powerful tool in that circumstance. Without that communication framework that you established as a family, both between you and your partner and you and the kids, I don't think the story would have evolved quite that way. Do you still remember words from your kids' mouths that haunt you as they were dealing with the changes
I mean,
of
the
the caregiving
grandparent,
family?
yeah, like why aren't our grandparents like that? Or, when they come to visit, all they want to do is, I just get Diet Cokes for them, or, they don't play with us, they don't do anything with us. Like, those kinds of things are certainly heartbreaking, um, type of stuff. And but I think in general, like, my parents tried to do the best that they could. They watched a lot of TV, with my kids, because that was kind of what they were capable of doing. And my husband's mother was much more agile, and so she would often and had a little kid spirit, and so they certainly have some fun memories of doing things with her before her cancer kind of progressed and got the best of her. But I don't think that they had a horrible childhood or anything. I've had them on the podcast to kind of get my
Mm-hmm.
podcast, and to get their kind of side of things and their perspective.
Really important.
Yeah. And I don't know, we joke now that we have great power of attorney, health and financial. My daughter's a travel nurse, so she definitely knew, though, that she did not want to take care for older adults. I'm like, she's had her fill of older adults. She's a NICU nurse for infants, and my son works in finance at a company. So we're like, oh well, we've got great people to kind of divide and conquer to help care for us. But just keeping those lines of communication open, like we still do that about what we want life to look like, what we need to be true. Going through our possessions and telling them stories, about it. Like, you inherit some of these items and you don't know the stories behind them. And so capturing those and writing them down and in a place where they can access them. It's not morbid. It's proactive.
Maybe even celebratory.
Yeah.
Someone throughout all of this got less and less of you every day. And it's interesting that you had the kids on the podcast and they had a chance to reflect. But maybe what do you think, or what do you even think your kids might say about who paid the biggest price in all of this?
I mean, I think, hopefully we've set a good example for them that, yes, you show up for your family, you love on them, you care for them, and you also love and care for yourself, like, without sacrificing yourself. If we did it right, that's what I'm hoping that they would say, is like, you really showed us how to do that.
And was your partner aligned with you throughout, or did you have to learn this new role together? Although I know he was also
Yeah.
looking after one of his parents as well. So it was, as you said, some
Yeah.
special sandwich.
Yeah, it was like a big, like, puzzle where we're just trying to put together the pieces. And, communication was a big part of that, and figuring out, okay, where are you going to carve out your time? Where are we going to carve out my time? Where's our we time, for
Mm-hmm.
us and for our family? And how do we divide and conquer, the kids' appointments and their activities and our parents, and putting some systems in place for that. Probably more of my skills set to be the organizer of that, but he's on board. Like, he knows that if the systems and stuff are in place, that they're working for us, and he can see it, right? Like, my shoulders start to drop, I sleep better. The house is, what do they say, happy wife, happy life? I mean, a little bit like that, yeah.
What do you think the kids learned about love and sacrifice through this whole process, and how has that affected their vision of the future?
Mm. It's a great question. Um, I think, yeah, family certainly a priority, like a value for all of us, and sacrificing, um, you know, do this stuff while you can. Like, they've seen what happens. We don't have a lot of really good examples in my family of like older adults who are living the dream of, although I will say my husband has a great aunt that's 100 years old that we were just around who's pretty amazing. And I keep telling her, like, you are a great example.
Role
We need
model.
this in our life, of somebody who still has agency and decision making and cognitive. Um, but do the fun things. I mean, I think we have a good time as a family. Like, we really prioritize the fun, and we talk about how we're going to infuse more fun in our year. Um, we know life is messy and it's hard, and that I've got a big family, and there's likely going to be a lot more opportunities to care, and I'm pretty open with them about, the current pressures of my brother, and they're they've got good adult advice for me sometimes. They're in my corner and part of my care team and say, "Mom, that's not okay. He can't do that. You need to put a boundary in place." Or so it's shining through, I think, that yeah, it's you show up, but not at all costs.
So you'd probably feel comfortable saying that you'd like them one day to follow your example as opposed to wanting something completely different for them when they face the
Um,
caregiving of others to come.
I mean, I'm hoping that, I'm hoping that I wouldn't be resentful, to being in a independent living, assisted living. My plan is to downsize as much as possible for them to make their lives easier. Um, do would I like to be in a granny pod in their backyard? Maybe, if it made sense, for them, and it was a working both ways where I was adding value and fun to their life. But, what I want them to live their own lives for sure. Like, yeah, your goal is not to take care of your dad and I.
When you look back, and do you remember moments where you clearly had to take and make that big choice between your parents' needs and your children's needs? And is it something that you just never prepared for until you're in that moment, and it almost you hit this sort of wall of overwhelm, realizing that, oh my God, I have to choose between these two things?
Yeah. Um, I mean, there was the birthdays and things like that. I would do some bargaining, I'm sure, and oh, we'll be sure to celebrate, on a different day, and trying to kind of come up with a win-win situation. Um, probably one of the hardest things that we did when was in 2014. We had planned a trip for four of us to go to Italy. It was going to be our first international trip. Kids were in high school, and one was in middle school, one was in high school. My dad had passed in August, but the trip was already planned. We had moved my mom, and then my mother-in-law was in a transitioning phase, like when the trip kind of came around, and it was a decision. It was, we talked about it, and we were like, you know, could she pass while we were gone? Maybe. Coulda, shoulda, woulda type of thing. But we ended up going. And it's probably to this day, like, our favorite vacation. And we've taken a lot of vacations because what do they need? Once they got in high school years, we would do more trips and stuff together. But I think it's because, like, when you're going through a really messy time, like, you know, grieving parents and transitioning mom and all of that, um, the diamonds and the rough really kind of shine bright. Like, everything was so kind of murky that you're like, this is so amazing. We're so far removed from our projects that we can't be there, right? Like, we're in Italy, we can't be there. We've set some systems up the best place that we can. And when we came back, we did lose my mother-in-law. She passed away just a couple days. She kind of hung on until we got back and passed away soon after that. So that was probably the time where we felt that biggest tug and that biggest pull. But you make the best decisions with the information you have at the time. And that's one of the mantras that I've certainly kind of lived by.
there's a recurring theme here that you've got your sibling family and you've got your partner, and the children grew with you in this role and really showed some healthy adjustment, yet some of the resentment that can develop in a caregiver, and I think a lot of people are facing that it may not be even about their parent directly or the role they have to play, but it's just about being alone, so alone in all of it. What's your advice for the most lonely, alone caregiver out there today?
Yeah. You're not alone. Like, a lot of people are feeling the way that you're feeling if you're listening to this. And
How do you
there
gain
is
strength in numbers?
Yeah, community is everything. It's a safe place. Like, I've never met another family caregiver I didn't like. Like, they just get it. They get it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm part of a nonprofit here in the Atlanta area. We've got programs here in the Atlanta area. I'm one of a national virtual program for daughterhood.org. Like, people can come and connect to virtual support sessions there. I do complimentary coaching calls to try to point people in the right direction and get them. There could be some support in your area, and maybe it's not a traditional caregiver support, and that's okay. Like, maybe it's your hike club, or for me, it was my book club. Like, I can't tell you how many times I would go to my book club and I would just tomato face cry, and those girls would just rally around me, and they would offer extra help and say, "I got your mom. I'm going to take her to get a flu shot on Tuesday." Or so I think that. But keeping it in, I know what doesn't work, and keeping it inside and just kind of thinking, oh, I'm going to, bootstrap it and push my way through it. And especially if you're a solo caregiver listening, like, never seen that work, never
Mm-hmm.
seen it. So you've got to figure out how to build the care team for your care recipient, but also for yourself. And there's two people in this partnership, and they both need some TLC.
Absolutely. And when that solo role is really driven home because the people who could help you the most, namely your siblings, really have chosen not to share in the caregiving load, how unfair does it get? At what point, from your experience and having spoken to so many people, are people pushed to? And do family relationships ever recover after that sort of solo caregiving that's imposed on one individual from a family, while everyone just sort of watches or crafts their own sort of strategy to help? Like, you should do this and you should do that, or, here's
Yeah,
here's
the
a bit of
Monday
here's a bit of money.
quarterbacking.
I'll talk to you in 6 months.
Yeah, I think that all families are different, and the foundation that you have before you go into caregiving certainly is going to make a difference. So I had a very solid foundation with my sisters and my one brother. And are we always on the same page in the line? Have we had some cracks in our foundation? Sure. And we work through some of those things. I also have a brother that, has never really shown up for my family. And it was very frustrating for us to say, why is that okay? Why is that fair? And, my other brother that, I've got 3 brothers and 2 sisters, but is very resentful still to this day of my brother. And for me, I've kind of processed it to say, well, he's always been like that. Why would caregiving make that any different? He's been consistent, is my word for him. And so when he says stuff that frustrates me, or he tries to come in and insert his 2 cents, first of all, he's not in the arena with us, so he doesn't get included in the texts and the conversations. Like, you don't get an opinion unless you're showing up and putting in the grit. And it just reared its head this week. He had his, opinions about what my brother's care, and yet the 4 of us are aligned. Like, hey, we're making the best decisions with the information we have at the time. So sorry that and does it kind of rub you the wrong way? Yes. Do I wonder who's going to care for him when he ages and needs help? Yeah. Like, what comes around kind of goes around, for sure. So it's hard. It's really hard. I think that, ultimately we can't change people. And so the only things that we can do is impact ourselves. I know it wasn't serving me to be resentful and angry with my brother. And so I had to kind of come to terms with, like, this is what our relationship is. And And it is heartbreaking and it is sad, but that was not my choice. He made those choices and continues to make those choices. And so then you kind of are looking around and saying, okay, help is not there. Where is help? Who are the people? And if they're not your other family members, then you do have to get more creative and find help outside of it.
What are the best resources you've found? Is it community organizations? Is it like-minded individuals and virtual communities online?
Yeah, I mean, I have some core caregiving friends that I know I could go to with anything, and that I've made online and through virtual support. I would say the most practical place, that has been the most helpful and given peace of mind is an elder law care attorney to set yourself up for all those things so that I could sleep better at night, knowing that my ducks are in a row. So I think it depends. It depends on what it is. It's hard to pick one thing. I would probably say the least helpful thing has been our healthcare system. Like they're just creating more work, more pain, more frustration. Like having to recall and make appointments and sometimes multiple times. Like just not making our lives any easier. It's really has been frustrating, and that is something that I wish would change.
So many people, and I mean, that just fuels forward. That's how the system makes its contribution, no doubt. But so many people are feeling burned out in the face of just those requirements, let alone the requirements of caregiving one-on-one for their loved one or their partner. And it all sort of snowballs. But when you sort of hit that point, and so many people are now, I mean, this is not a new conversation, but it's certainly being popularized, caregiver burnout, caregiver syndrome. When you hit that peak in your journey, what did it feel like, sort of mind and body? What were you going through when you look back at it now?
It's funny because I definitely hit it the first time around, and I've hit it again. I hit it again toward the end of last year with my brother's stuff, and it reared up differently. And so sometimes it's not the same ways, but I think, the first time around, it was, very easy to cry, when I'd start talking about things, losing interest in the things that I enjoyed and pulling back from that. Certainly, I was gaining weight and my health was suffering. I had a face full of acne. Now, the burnout type of thing now is, in trying different tools is like, I'm a coach, right? Helping people recover and mitigate burnout and talking about it. Like, how can this have happened again? And it's interesting because it is that kind of frog in the boiling water analogy where like you would jump in the water, you would, and it was boiling, you would immediately jump out, but you're living your life and it just kind of is slowly, gradually happening. And so I think what really kind of has hit me this time around is that some of the strategies that worked for me before to recover from burnout are not working, and that maybe is like this, like a deeper physiological kind of a burnout type of thing. And so then it's just kind of getting curious and trying different things. And I think that's where, the talking has certainly helped because you look at from the outside and I'm doing the stuff, I'm working out 3 days a week. I play pickleball. I'm in mahjong. I have a girls thing. I travel. I do a lot of the self-care things. So how could I possibly still feel burnt out? Well, it just it just creeps up on you.
And you're not the first person who said that. I was doing everything right, and yet I still hit the wall. What
Yeah, because you're human and you're just like in an impossible, um, draining situation for sure.
for
Yeah.
those people listening, do you have any advice for like the experience in the moment of like what you really need to pay attention to when you need to acknowledge that you're the next person in line who needs some care because it can't go on that way?
Yeah, I think you do have to become kind of hyper aware of yourself. And so I will say, even though I've been experiencing burnout, I knew I was like, oh, you're here again. This is happening again. Um, and I think having those trusted people that are going to be honest with you, like my husband's one of those person, we check each other and say, hey, but don't wait too long. Like, reach out and find the support, surround yourself with that, and realize that you're worthy of it. Like, you need it. You need it just as so many people are counting on you. Yes, that's one reason to need it, but you deserve it too, just because you're a human being on this earth. And so knowing that, getting to that point where, like, the game is really about how to make it sustainable, and we're put in an kind of an impossible situation where we can only do so much on that, and they're just, the systems around us are faulty. And so recognizing that it's kind of broken, and you're in a little bit of
Really
a
broken.
battle. Yeah, and that it could be a season of your life, and it might be your whole life. And so try to figure out, like, what is it, what does good enough look like for you? What does doing the best you can look like for you?
So many individuals don't have access to communication skills, to supportive siblings, to a partner who's aligned, a partner who's not resentful, or partner one can talk to and constructively and really sort of team build. When individuals who don't have those resources, who are already feeling the pressure and just feel they can't go on caregiving anymore, what urgent options do families have in those circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, then it's.
You
I mean,
can't
if
just
you,
drop people off at the emergency. I mean, I've seen it happen. It's like, yeah, we can't do this. Here you go. I mean, that's not the right way either. But it is
no, I mean,
desperate in some instances.
talking to your care team, calling your area agency on aging may be helpful. And then that's certainly not going to be like, yes, the resource that saved everything is the area agency on aging. I cannot say that. So, but I know, like, we were in a situation with my cousin who was an only child for her parents, and her mom had a really difficult form of dementia, frontal temporal dementia, progressive supranuclear palsy.
Yep.
Her dad was drowning. She was living remotely, and we did end up having to kind of call the area agents on aging. They sent somebody in to do an assessment, and my cousin's inclination was, like, to try to make it look perfect when they came. I said, no, you need to show it the way that it is.
Authenticate it.
Yes, the raw, genuine way that it is, so that you can get the help you need. And it was painful, but it was that was really kind of the breaking point for that family. And maybe we waited too long, frankly, because by then I think my uncle was, beyond kind of beyond burnout and had his own health things then kind of spiral. So yeah, it's heartbreaking. But I do think you've got to reach out and keep asking, their doctor, your doctor. I can't, again, showing those cracks. I'm not able to keep doing this anymore. I'm completely burned out. My mental health has suffered, my physical health. I need help. And keep pushing.
There's so much storytelling that's going on these days, and you'll still hear people who just love to say, I would never put my mom or dad in a home. Like, how can you even think of that? What don't they get? Like, what are they just not understanding about what families are actually facing in 2026 on such a large, sweeping scale?
I think any kind of rigid promises, I wouldn't recommend them. I don't, with the kids, I didn't do this. It's like, oh, we'll see. We'll see was like my favorite phrase with my kids. And, it's the conversation and the dialogue with your older adult. Like, you don't know the circumstances and how they're going to change. And there's no crystal ball as to what you're going to be able to endure and take on. And again, that, like, repeat over and over and over again of the things that are going in your life, and to feel those feelings and kind of sink into that as an individual, and realizing you're not the person, and the ripple effect that's happening around your whole foundation of your family and everything. Like, it's a lot to consider. Had you back then, we did have my mom. My mom was in 2 assisted living communities. So after my dad passed away, we knew that we were not in a position as working parents to bring my mom into our house and give her the care that she needed. Was it really hard? Absolutely. Did she want to go? She didn't want to go, and we tried 2 different places, and eventually my older sister did take her and stayed at home and decided that that's what she made that choice. I think it's a big choice. And now similar with my brother, like with his disabilities, like as a long-term care plan, you need something that's sustainable. And I don't know about you, Mark, but I don't have all of the skills that are required to be somebody's activities director and their medical needs and their emotional needs and still kind of function as a human myself. So there's a lot of things to consider, and I don't want to get into that position like almost like the working moms were like way back in the 90s, where a working home versus a stay-home mom, and which one is better, an at-home caregiver versus a caregiver who has their people living in their community. Like, it's all hard. So and everybody's situation is a little bit different. And so instead of kind of coming to these places where we're looking to kind of divide and judge, like, let's come together and support and help each other.
Yeah, I think so. And that notion of, the good child is the child who's supposed to endure anything and everything. And, that can really become not only exhausting, but dangerous, especially for others around you, kids watching. I mean, what I've heard from your story today is that your kids actually learned a lot from you. They actually learned a lot about communication. They learned a lot about sitting down and opening up about things and speaking and listening. But you can appreciate when you're talking about just, I'm here to endure anything, and everything else will pay the price. That can be destructive on so many fronts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the rigid, to be fluid, and it changes, like to pivot and assess and diagnose and kind of change course and paths is important. And to be flexible, that we can't control it. Like, we're talking about other human beings. It's not something that one person can successfully control all on their own.
Everybody has a different beginning, middle, and end to their story, but certain beginnings, unfortunately, are really challenging and set the stage for distress later on in life. What happens if the care recipient you're charged with happened to be abusive or is a very narcissistic personality, and then you have to grow into that role as their caregiver? How does that unfold if they're under your roof or you're taking on more and more responsibilities for them? And like, do you owe them even
No.
more or less in that case? And I mean, then potentially your kids are also vulnerable to seeing that also.
No, I mean, I think we have a responsibility, especially as parents, to keep our kids safe, to, our marriage healthy. There have been times where my husband and I discussed having his mom come live with us, which she did not want to do. But in thinking that through and having those conversations, like, my brother, it's very clear to us we could not have my brother come live with us. It would completely change the dynamic of our family. He's an angry person. He's a mean person. He's a night owl. Like, all of those things have repercussions on your day-to-day life. And so boundary setting is healthy in all of those relationships. And I think especially important when you're talking about toxic, narcissistic relationships. And you have a choice ultimately. Like, I know sometimes it does feel for people that they don't have a choice to show up for people. But you do. You do. And, so I choose to help my brother. Like, could I just, we pay the bill and leave him there? Yeah, we could. But we're not going to do that. That's not how we were raised. And so I'm going to show up in the ways that I can show up. But I'm also going to have boundaries and say, no, it's not okay to talk to me that way. No, I'm not going to respond to your messages when you talk to me that way. And protect myself from that. I'm only going to check your messages so many times a day because I know that it's mentally for me hard to do. So it's on us to protect ourselves and to protect our our key relationships that are healthy first, and then, set the boundaries around them. I really feel for people that are in those really tough situations.
It can be debilitating and demoralizing, I think, beyond what we can easily fathom or imagine. Before we wrap it up today, Elizabeth, you've made such an important contribution throughout your journey, and you've reached so many people. And I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us today, because we've learned a lot from you, and we're certainly trying to help spread the message of all of our guests, because they're so valuable. For that
Thank
person
you.
listening at home today, who's entering the arena of caregiving, what would be your most important message to them that they can follow and take them to the next first steps required for a success story, as opposed to a downward spiral?
Yeah, I mean, it's against our grain to really try to be proactive and to think through this, but as much as you kind of can, learn from other people's stories and their trajectories, see what's going to happen. How can you get in front of it? You're going to have more options at that time when you're not in a crisis situation. And I like to say, that the best day to find support is on your best day. I think a lot of times as caregivers, we wait until our hair is on fire and we're in the deep, end of the pool drowning. And oh my gosh, now we need help. Like, what would happen if you really sought that help before you really needed it, and you got some tools and some strategies that could help you maybe even prevent that crisis, is one thing. But also what a help you could be for somebody else who's needing to learn from you, and that you have a lot to learn and share, and it validates that journey for you. So that would be my biggest tip, is like, don't wait, connect to your community. If it's not through the resources that I have, then find something else that's gonna be useful to you. And the sooner you do it, the better.
Well, I'd like to thank you for all that advice.
Thank
and
you.
for really allowing us to go places today and talk about scary things that people sometimes don't want to talk about or just don't want to hear. We wish you the best. That wraps up this week's episode of the Caregivers Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mark, and we'll see you next time. Before we wrap up, I wanted to remind you of something important. The conversations you hear on this podcast are here to inform, to support, to spark reflection. They're not a substitute for professional medical advice, care, therapy, or crisis services. Listening to this podcast does not create a doctor-patient or caregiver-client relationship between us. If you're facing a medical concern, health challenge, a mental health challenge, or a caregiving situation that needs guidance, I encourage you to reach out to a qualified professional who knows your story. If you're ever in crisis, please don't wait. Call your local emergency number or recognize crisis hotline right away. You deserve real-time help and support. The views you hear on this show, whether from me or my guests, are our own. They don't necessarily reflect any organizations we work with, or are part of, or have worked with, or been part of in the past. This podcast is an independent production. It's not tied to any hospital, university, or healthcare system. Thank you for being here, for listening, and most of all, for taking the time to care for yourself while you continue to care for others. I look forward to hearing from you.